Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar session. I won't say good afternoon because I don't know where people are kind of calling in from, so it may well be the morning or even the evening where you are. But a very warm welcome to today's webinar with the Drum and our friends at Nonsense. I'm Richard Draker. I'm the Associate Editor here at the Drum, and we're delighted to be working in collaboration again with the guys at Nonsense. I think it's our second webinar. We did one a few months ago, and that one actually ended up then being recreated on stage at the Drum Live in September. So who knows where this could go. But it's great to have you with us anyway. In today's webinar, the long form and the short of it, which is a great title, a lovely pun. And as a journalist, I do love a pun. I wish I'd thought of it, but I think that's probably Rob's creation. Rob, the host, and I guess are going to be talking about, discussing, debating, exploring the pros and cons of short form and long form content. Obviously, a very relevant and topical subject at the moment, and we got a hell of a lot of sign-ups for today's session. So clearly, this is something that a lot of people are thinking about, probably having conversations internally about. So, going to be a really, really interesting session. And we're going to be talking about, when it's right to use, long form or short form, the different jobs that they can do, obviously, for brands and marketers. And I suppose even we had a conversation when we were preparing for this webinar, even just kind of a clarification of what constitutes short form and what constitutes long form. It's quite an interesting conversation. So we'll kind of get to all that as well. From a Drum perspective, obviously, as a content creation business, the length of content has always been very interesting to us. And when I joined the Drum in 1998, which is a long time ago, the average feature length was around about 2,000 words. And over the years, it's kind of shrunk to 1,500 to 1,200. And now quite often we're doing kind of pieces of around 700 to 800 words. And again, that's because, we feel that, or we believe that people want, very easily accessible content, but that may not be right, as we'll find out during the conversation later on. So I won't delay proceedings any longer. You're not here to listen to me. I'll hand across to Rob Mosley, who's the strategy director at Nonsense, who'll be leading the conversation, and he'll introduce his guests. Just before I do that, though, obviously we want this to be as interactive as the webinar medium allows. So if you've got any questions or you want any kind of points kind of clarified or anything like that during the conversation, then please do feel free to type your questions into the chat box, and Rob will kind of feed them in to the conversation at the most relevant time. So without further ado, Rob, I'll hand over to you to get the session started.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just checking that I'm off mute. Which is good. I'll just briefly introduce myself. So, I'm the founder and the strategy partner at Nonsense. We're all about building credibility for brands and have become increasingly interested in long form content and made more and more of it for our clients, particularly over the last couple of years. But if I'm honest, until about a year ago, like that was based on a lot of gut feel around what we sort of knew worked and what we suspected would work for unique situations for particular clients. And then I started looking into the science behind it, because actually what we hear in the media all the time, and that's why I had the idea for this webinar in the first place, what we hear in our own media all the time is that shorter is better. And so we're here to talk about that today. I've boned up on it a bit, but I'm not the expert. The rest of the panel are the experts. And I just want to go quickly round and introduce everybody who we've got. Leah, if you could just give us a wave. Leah is from Mindscope Labs. She's the founder of that and CEO of that, and is a regular public speaker on the subject of attention spans, because her background is a neuroscientist and she's done a lot of her own research into this stuff. Then we have Barney Woolfolk-Smith from David. So for those of you that don't know David, they're a creative effectiveness company that use AI in order to properly understand how people react emotionally to content. And they've built a brilliant bit of software that can tell you the emotions that a human will feel from start to finish of the content. And they are sitting on a load of data about that is directly relevant to this conversation in terms of content length, right? Like how do we keep people's attention throughout longer form stuff? So I'm going to be really interested to hear from you on that. And then we have Matt Ramage, who gives us a client-side viewpoint. So he's category lead at Trimble. For those that don't know Trimble, you will know SketchUp. That's probably their most famous consumer product, but they're a massive global engineering company, multi-billion dollar, I believe, Matt. And Trimble are actually a client of ours as well. And we've done some long-form content for them, notable documentary series for them in the B2B space. So I just think that's interesting because I've known Matt a long time, and he's always been in the world of content marketing up until recently, where he's been so successful at it. He's been promoted beyond a marketing remit at Trimble, I think it's fair to say. So we're here to first of all examine this idea of human attention, right? Most of you on the call probably have heard that human attention spans are shrinking. Um, and yet, you get anecdotal bits of evidence like, and you witness human behaviors like the binge watching of Netflix shows for hours and hours and hours on end. I came across a piece of research just the other day in preparation for this about how actually human IQ is increasing, and many neuroscientists believe that their ability to pay attention to things for longer is increasing directly in line with our IQs increasing over time. Um, where does that come from? I think that becomes a great place for us to kick off, because as an industry we are addicted to short form content, right? Like we all spend a lot of money pumping that stuff out and we're much more likely as brands to invest in high volume of loads of short content and pump media money behind it. But that fact that, human attention spans are shortening just is not particularly backed up by anything. So first of all, let's just have a bit of a chat about why it is that we think the industry is addicted to short form content in the first place. So I'd like to put the first question to you, Barney, actually. Uh, how do you define short and long form in terms of duration? Because it is, you know, I could define it one way and other people might another. So
Exactly. Good foundational question. So we did chat about this in the meeting that we had to discuss our ideas, and I think instinctively a few of us came to about 30 seconds, but I did actually ask ChatGPT after that meeting, and it didn't know. It couldn't give me a definition. So everybody who's tuned in, you're already getting more value out of this than you are out of ChatGPT. So we instinctively said about 30 seconds, and depending on what definition I got out of ChatGPT, it said maybe up to 60. But I based that on the fact that we look at tens of thousands of ads every week, and the vast majority that we deal with is 30 seconds and below. So instinctively, that's why I'd say it's that area.
great. And I think there's a stat that 66% of marketers say that the shorter form stuff is the most engaging. Now, what does the numbers tell us, in terms of what you're seeing at your end?
What, in terms of the most engaging?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we did a little data pool when we were discussing this before. And as I said, even though the vast majority of the stuff that we look at is 30 seconds and less, where we are looking at 1 minute and above, out of a score of 10, it's between zero point 0.2 and zero point 0.4 uh, points more emotionally engaging. So not necessarily the highest effectiveness score because things like attention and brand recall are taken into account, but in terms of emotionally engaging, significantly higher.
Interesting. So there's clearly some form of opportunity in long form for marketers. Just sticking, I just want to talk to Matt quickly. I presume you've invested in a lot of short form content over the years. Why as an industry do you feel like we're addicted to this idea of shorter is better?
But I think if I'm giving the perspective, especially as say on the client side or the product vendor that's actually pushing marketing out to drive conversion towards dollars, or pounds at the end of it. To me, there's a big hook in what metrics drive success for the marketers themselves within the organization. So if you mentioned about engagement and we're sure we can drive higher engagement with short form content, well, mathematically, of course you can. It's easy to drive 100% retention on a 7-second video, well, far easier than a 7-minute video. So if you're reporting on things that maybe based on views or percentage of time watched and things like that, you may be looking at red herring metrics, but they could make you look good internally. So you'll put out a lot of that content. It de-risks your spend as well, because you can show high engagement, push things a little further down the funnel, whereas investment in longer form content, which has a higher engagement, higher emotional connection, has a higher conversion rate to sale, that is far riskier, because you might do one piece of long form for every 20 to 50 pieces of short form. So I've always believed that there's a strong synergy that's needed, but you really need to have a strong handle on what metrics drive real success for the business, rather than ones that may be more artificial or may convince people that don't understand the true value of those metrics.
Yeah, I think that's where my head would be at with it, is that there's a lot of vanity metrics in social media that we can use to make ourselves look good as marketers. And we've had a lot of help from the social media companies, right, in terms of being able to trumpet those metrics. They shout about them all the time and help us, build reporting platforms for us that allow us to quickly download a chart that makes it look awesome, just in time for our annual salary review, right? And that, I think, for me, is a big part of it. It's not about we're not focusing on what actually works for the brand. So let's just quickly broaden this out to the whole panel. Advantages, and disadvantages of short form content. Like, obviously, and we're not saying it doesn't have a place. We're going to talk a lot about long form later. But what do you feel about the role of short form?
I mean, I'll dive in, and without meaning to sort of get to the end of the conversation at the start, Matt's already highlighted the fact that different lengths of content should be designed to live in different places to do different jobs that are specifically pertinent to that business, be it B2B, B2C, wherever their key particular platform might be. So yeah, short form is fantastic for filling up those platforms with mid to lower funnel stuff to make people go and buy. Whereas in there, it might be harder to push out highly emotive and engaging and powerful pieces of longer form creative, which could longer form completely shift the way in which a business is perceived.
Amazing. So I just wanted to get your perspectives first as well. I was really curious about like what your perspectives were on short versus long. It feels like, and that's what we see on a daily basis, like the consumer mindset is very different depending on the platform they're on and the context they're in as well. So if we were to look at short form versus long form, most of the time, and we'll speak about it more, we see more connection and even more engagement and intentional attention when we build long form content, because we're humans, we need stories, we need experiences, we need to dive in. So what behavioral science essentially tells us about human experience, we don't really see that reflected in most of the current like brand strategies and channel strategies. But what I'll say is to echo like Matt's point as well, short form could be a great kind of a way to get the audience in, to get that signal in, to create those cues, but that's not your end metric. Like the engagement rate is not your destination, it's not your final KPI. So they work in synergy with each other. So I definitely think that we need to kind of leverage the capabilities of short form and what it can do to give us insights around our audiences, our listeners, our viewers, our consumers, and then play on that and build stories and narratives and arcs to engage them within our IP or our narrative and our ecosystem. They work in synergy, but the problem we're seeing at the moment is hyper investment in short and lower investment in long form, when actually long form gives you a better connection and a better relationship with your end consumer. So we'll speak about it more, but that's basically the tension we're seeing at the moment.
I think that's really interesting. Oh, the context of the platform that the user is on, right? For me, that the platforms that have driven short form have algorithms that are designed to get the user through as many pieces of content as possible, because that's what the designers of that social media application want people to do. When we use it as a tool, like, and actually all of them have started shorter form than they've ended up. Like, I think, I remember when, Vine died, right? Vine died, and because it stuck to 7 seconds rigidly, and then died. Every other one has ended up giving the users of the platform the ability to post longer and longer and longer stuff. And as brands, we need to recognize why humans want those longer form stories, and actually maybe the role of the short form stuff is to snip it and get people into that bigger thing. But again, we don't want to jump to the end right now. So but yeah, really, really interesting. Okay, so we set the scene, right? We're in an industry that's addicted to short form, but there's some big question marks about that. That fact about attention spans shrinking, I toyed with being gentler with the way that I wrote this slide. It is just not a fact. It turns out is that back in, I think, 2015, Microsoft published a study, quite a controversial study, that genuinely claimed with a straight face that the human attention span in 2013 had shrunk to 8 seconds, shorter than that of a goldfish. And everyone went, yeah, that makes sense. Now, let's just let that sit with us for a second. There's no way that an intelligent animal like a human has a shorter attention span than a goldfish. There isn't, but we all just swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. It was actually, neuroscientists jump on this straight away. The BBC debunked this. It's really, really interesting that this myth has pervaded for so long, despite such a lot of evidence to the contrary, and we keep seeing more and more. This guy Neil Patel, he did a short versus long form test recently, and it's just a small experiment that he did. But the people who interacted with the short form stuff couldn't even remember what it was about, and the people who interacted with the long form stuff could. Yesterday, YouTube published their global culture and trends report, and the key insight for the United Kingdom is the growth of long form video. I'm even amazed that the word unexpected is in that first headline on that screen grab. Like, anyone who's watched YouTube will have seen, or consumes YouTube content, will have seen the content get longer. For my sins, I watch really long, boring carpentry videos to chill me out, right? Like that's what I like watching. And some of them are 45 minutes long. And yeah, you can laugh at me for it, but it's what I do. And that's really, really interesting, right? So we need to understand attention better. Leah, that's why you were invited to the panel, because you can give us a bit of a science view on it. Here's a few slides from Leah's recent keynote at the Advertising Business Group Leadership event. I'm not going to read your slides for you, and I'm sure you're not going to present them. But my question for you is, I want to know a bit about the research that you've done into attention spans, and tell us what you understand about them. And because I can't imagine they haven't changed at all over time. So what's happened to humans as the world's changed?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. To be really honest, I got a bit, I think towards mid this year, I got a bit not frustrated, but a bit like I wanted to really answer that question, because I kept seeing brands going shorter, but I kept seeing tech companies going longer and wanting to tap into the experience economy. So there was a discrepancy between the marketing echo chambers, what tech companies were doing, and what consumers really want. And a lot of that was hinging on the attention economy. And within those conversations, we started digging further into it. And we saw that there were a lot of conversations about attention spans. So it brings you back to this Microsoft era about the goldfish and the debunking of it. And as a modern behavioral scientist, it's kind of my mission and our mission to debunk this now. So essentially, we wanted to look deeper into it. And as you know, we work with media companies, we work with tech companies, and a company like Snapchat, for example, is all about experiences. It's all about building AR filters that can engage people. It's all about partnering with like legacy media brands on their platforms to get the younger generation to watch more stories. It's all about collaborating with creators to build something deeper and get that intentional attention and that engagement. So basically what we wanted to look at even further was whether or not it was really attention that was shrinking. Because again, as a behavioral scientist, I would never ever be comfortable to say, as you said, Rob, that attention spans are shrinking, because again, you have to consider neurodiversity layers and the fact that attention is different, for different people within different contexts and mechanisms. So we wanted to understand what was happening within that process. If it's not attention spans, then what's actually happening within our ecosystem at the moment? We started digging further into all of that. And as you could see, you could see kind of the conclusion in those slides. But as you know, we've got 120 slides of stats and data that kind of sits behind that. But we started seeing that actually, because of that content overload and all of kind of that information that gets pushed at the modern audience, we built those kind of the modern audiences built those kind of advanced mechanisms, especially the younger generation, to filter out information much quicker. So they filter out information based on the signals that they get in. Once this is filtered out, attention becomes longer. So attention is no longer something that brands should win or try to capture. It's something that audiences should give. It's something that they want to give. So the bargaining power has completely changed. That's why we coined the term filtering spans, because it's not really about attention spans. It's not about designing shorter, and shorter. We're humans, we need stories, we need connection. It's about filtering them into your IP and your brand universe, and then getting them to co-create, to remix, to participate, to look at your content and engage with it. So this is kind of how modern audiences behave. I'm more than happy again to dig even further, because I know that you know how much I speak. But again, this is essentially in a nutshell the differentiation between attention spans. No, they're not shrinking. Attention was always there, but we got much quicker at filtering in information, which also means that audiences can give you even more attention, as you mentioned.
I love it. I mean, it's not a surprise that humans have got better at filtering in a world where they've just had to, because there's so much more stuff to filter through. And I like the idea that there is still we have to do something about that filtering. We have to get through the filter, right, as a brand. So we can talk a bit about how we might do that. But once through, there isn't, any other limit on it based on an assumption around attention span is artificial limit. It's either the algorithm's limit or the platform's limit, where it's artificially capped at a certain length of content, or you just don't make content that's interesting enough to sustain somebody's attention. Which again, we can storytell and be creative to make sure that we combat. Okay, so I guess I have to ask ourselves a question. Barney, I'd like to ask you this: Are we basing major creative decisions on a myth? Because I think that my concern is that as people have got better and better at filtering, that's been played back to us as data of like, oh, the average person thumb scrolls through this many pieces of content per day. Therefore, we need to make loads more bits of short form content because they're all consuming so much content. We need to make sure we're a part of it. And I worry about that as an industry.
Which is us about face. Sugar tastes good, so we have more sugar. Stupid. But I wanted to let Leah speak there. I was going to Google some, what are the attention studies that have happened. I recommend you delve into Leah's work because it's all there. One of the things we touched on in terms of creating content and planning on a myth, we've touched on it, but I think we should say it specifically. The advertising industry has a habit of just looking at as we've already said, the echo chambers on LinkedIn and the people that make the most noise, which is the social platforms, and the types of content that they are promoting being made suits them and their revenue generation, and might not be completely aligned with business goals. And as Leah's pointed out, certainly isn't aligned with the way that we as humans behave. So to answer the simple question, are we planning creative and where it goes in media on a myth? Yeah, we need to think more carefully about it.
Okay, that's really well put. And I think it is good to state it that plainly. Matt, I just want to come to you with a question, because you've given nonsense creative briefs where you very consciously on your part have left it open to us to think about the length of pieces of content, and been very receptive when we said to you, we think we should make a documentary series for you and every episode is going to be 15 seconds long. Now, I'm not sure you knew all of this neuroscience stuff or had read Leia's back catalogue of research prior to making those decisions, because that was a few years ago. You've obviously gone on a form of gut feel when you've made that decision. Um, and so look, tell us a bit about your thinking around that and how we got to what eventually became the Great Library, obviously for Trimble, which is a piece of work we did together.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. A lot of it revolves around um, being humble enough to know that you never know best, and that an agency that works within this space consistently is more up to date with habits and trends, because I think it's the kind of human experience that you're fed something that or humans become attuned to something. We start feeding them tons and tons of marketing in that format, and then they become tired and sick of it, and then we start to see some kind of rebellion and shift to it. So often I feel like you'll learn something in university, and you'll have people that 10 years later expect the same truths to be the case. That isn't the kind of humanity of how we consume content. So when we start these kind of pieces, I also really consider the whole currency of views in and trying to shift that into something like share of mind, which is similar to what Leah was talking about. And when I care about share of mind, I also care about the proposition that I cannot solve complex problems in 10 seconds, but I can pique your interest in that time. So how do I use short form as a way of triggering discovery or signaling, but how do I use long form as my way to really create attachment and make, we always talked about how do you become the core advisor to the hero being the viewer or the consumer of the content. We want to be a core advisor that you come back to. And who better to purchase your services or your products from than the people that you take advice from? That's always been core in my mind. There is one last piece on this, and maybe this is getting right down into like metrics of value for money, but I view the long form as, if you imagine a solar system, the long form's the star, and I would produce all of the content that comes out of it from the star. So the planets, the asteroids, whatever is orbiting the star, is all smaller form content that's able to be produced from the larger piece. So I get great ROI from longer form content because one piece of content might generate 200 pieces of upstream that drives it towards the center.
Yeah, and that's what Barney, you would call atomization of content, right? Where you take a big piece and then turn it into a whole ecosystem of small pieces.
Precisely. It's quite interesting, actually, and I don't have an answer. I'd always traditionally thought of working with a larger hero piece and atomizing down subsequent, but actually both you, Matt, and Leia have talked about building upwards and understanding the signals from consumers to build what that bigger story is, which is something that I haven't always done, but that's an interesting way of approaching it.
I also think, Matt, one of the points you made is about complexity. We work across B2C and B2B, and I see B2B brands embracing long form more, mainly from the purely practical consideration, which you pointed out, of my thing that I have to explain is quite complicated, right? In Matt's case, just so that people know, it's an ecosystem of hardware and software products that allow all different types of construction industry professionals, from architects to air conditioning installation businesses, to collaborate on the same 3D design of a building as the building is being built, right? Now, I worked on that for 3 years and can now explain it in 30 seconds. But like when you're trying to explain that to a new person, it's not surprising that we landed on a format that was a series of 15-minute films to really explore that in depth. But I am interested. I'd love to see Marmite make a 15-minute long film, right? Like the product's simple, like weird black jam that I don't know why anybody eats it. But like, I still think they would see the same benefits because of the emotional ability to tell storytelling and hook emotions in. So that's something I think we should talk about more as we move forward. Because the next thing I want to talk about is about getting the best from long form, and how the people that have tuned in today, but also how we as brand people can get the best out of long form, right? We know that the studies show us that the more attention people give, the longer they stay with us, the more money they spend. So, sure, Matt, you talked about the metrics behind this, right? Like it's that share of mind equals share of wallet eventually. And I think that comes from a very recent McKinsey report. I'll try and get the name for it, or Gemma, if you're listening, and you can pull that out of the deck that Tom took us through this morning. There's a good link to a really good McKinsey report about the financial aspect of this. Matt, how do we capture more of it? And I do want to ask everybody this question. You said, like, you mentioned intrigue at first. What are the techniques that we can do to capture people's interest in the first place?
Interest in the first place? Well, I guess this is where, because there's no way that I'm anti short form content in any way whatsoever, because short form is like crucial for contextual relevance. It's, this is how you stay up to date with things that change each day. Like, you included that YouTube study in this, and you could write a snapshot on that each day, whereas you wouldn't write or create a 15-minute video about it without it taking time, and you might not be as relevant if you publish that a week later. So contextual relevance is really important. But that short form content, acting as a filter to kind of, you've cast a wide net. You're trying to find initial intent. I want those people in, and then I want to, like, people that are kind of relevant to me to seek value in the content that we have. But we use short form content to keep top of mind, especially. The long form, though, on attention, I think the hardest thing we always had, and this plays into why people, I think, are scared of more long form investment in some cases, because repeat visitation or bringing people back as understanding you as a core advisor on multiple pieces as opposed to just a singular piece. So creating a kind of loyalty through content as an advisor, I think, is incredibly difficult and requires you to, when they first land and first experience longer form content with you, can you truly demonstrate value that you're then able to kind of take advantage of in the future, where you're filling their feed in a way that gets them to come back, or that they remember the content that you put through. So completing some sort of parasocial bonding where I learned from you for a few hours, so I trust you and I'll return. I think long form. Oh, sorry, carry on, mate.
No, I was going to say completely. You're talking about the job of persuading the CFO to invest in brand stuff where it's hard to, well, a big long form piece of highly emotive creative, which fundamentally will shift perceptions of the brand, but it doesn't have these like nice metrics that you can get from short form to be able to prove exactly what's happening there. It's this kind
unless you. So that is something I struggled with, this sort of invisible ROI of long form.
Yeah.
But I believe that you need to create some form of community, and that's the only way to truly understand ROI with long form content. So let's say I think people, blog creators and YouTube channels that produce long form content do this really well, where you are able to see, I have a certain metric, which is my number of followers, an engagement rate over the length of a video, especially in core moments, and then a percentage of people that convert into whatever I'm trying to offer them, a way to monetize that audience. Then you can truly see that. So if you're just producing long content and trying to track a metric that says, okay, this person then filled out a form to buy something, I think it's not a mature enough model to truly understand what's going on.
I mean, that segues to Barney quite nicely, because, Barney, you're trying to help the industry understand creative effectiveness better. When it comes to long form, my understanding of the way you can help brands understand the value of any content, short or long form, is your system will measure whether or not the piece of content captures attention first, then whether or not it emotionally engages second, and then whether or not that successfully translates into writing memory structures in the brains of those individuals. Now, that's worth money. The minute that that's memorable, because you can measure recall. I mean, it's all worth money, but I should have said that's very measurable, right? You can survey, did you remember that thing? And the Neil Patel thing that's on earlier in this deck, very small experiment, I should caveat, he's gone, yeah, all the long form people remembered and all the short form people didn't remember. So perhaps we're getting close to it not being as difficult as Matt points out in terms of us being able to measure ROI for long form. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just like so, as you say, the way in which any creative is effective is attention first, then it has to, you don't just, if I were to say, yeah, I went to the party and I turned there, I stood and I didn't say anything, that's very different for me arriving at the party and then saying something. So attention's not enough. You need to then do something, and that something is evoke emotions. And the thing that long form has that short form doesn't is an ability to be able to story tell and not only make emotions felt more intensely, but also a wider range of emotions can be developed. Like inspiration, for example, is it's easier to develop in a story than it is to just show a particular image that's something that might be inspiring. And then build on top of that the brand recall, so you remember whose party it is, and that's when you get the effects that you actually need. Now, in longer form content where you have the ability to build these highly emotive stories, quite often it's not about putting a call to action, buy Trimble stuff now, or or this particular thing that we do over there. It's about an overarching feeling that that customer should be fostering and feeling on a long-term basis towards that company, which can then be activated using Matt's analogy from the sun by the asteroids and all the other planets which orbit that in the shorter form content, which is dissipated across different platforms and elsewhere, probably more cheaply as well.
To
So
be
yeah, long
yeah.
form can do emotions.
Yeah. To be really honest, all that conversation I was really like diving into and obviously like listening in because it relates a lot with a lot of like behavioral work and projects that we have within the B2B sector as well. So we're working at the moment with like a big B2B vendor around psychographic segmentation. So how can we map out those high value audiences and then how can we actually communicate to them in different ways? We built a new behavioral loop, so a retention framework to speak to those decision makers based on their psychological profiles. So the content strategy, the channel strategy, and honestly, looking at that and looking at this compared to this kind of trade classification to some extent really works out because you can create long form content that resonates with them. And as Matt said and Barney said as well, you can create this kind of ecosystem where you've got new KPIs to measure against. You can get internal buy-in internally if you can kind of take that strategy and get them to adopt it within their organization as like the main target profile. So we're seeing that more and more in the B2B sector, where some vendors even they come to us and they're like, okay, what are the psychological profiles that sit behind our top decision makers, and how can we engage them
Yeah.
across a content and channel strategy?
Which gives you a brilliant storytelling brief, right? Like now we know where their heads are at. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And also if they want to engage more technically or more practically or with more like narrative-based emotional storytelling. So it gives you all those cues, and I think it's fascinating. But obviously, it's always been there within the B2C sectors, but we're seeing like employee advocacy loops, like social cues on social as well from kind of the B2B sectors, which I find fascinating at
yeah.
the moment.
I just want to talk because Barney, you mentioned this. I just want to talk about the link between emotion and memory structure quickly to make because I found this fascinating when I interviewed your business partner Ian for my
Yeah.
podcast. He said, you mentioned a score out of 10 on emotional resonance, right?
Well, yeah.
He mentioned a certain benchmark under which no memory structure is written. So if you don't resonate enough emotionally, it just doesn't. It's never going to. No one will remember it.
Well, you put me on the spot because I can't remember what that number is.
Right. Well, I
But
don't think the number matters.
yeah, but what I can tell you in terms of the power of emotion, right, is within the pantheon of things that make any creative effective, driving intense or heightened emotional responses to that piece of creative is probably the single most important thing that you can do to driving any desirable brand outcomes from bottom to top of funnel. And there's a load of interesting features. Longer, keeping it pertinent to longer form, I would say that we see generally that in short form, snackable content, there are much fewer emotions generally elicited because there isn't time to do much other than crack a gag, shock someone, right?
Yeah,
Whereas in a
surprise
longer
and
form,
humor. Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly. I mean, it's not as facile as that, but it is limited,
Yeah.
definitely, against the broader emotional lexicon that we see in longer form content, which is, taking us all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's definitely higher. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is to do with positive and negative, that we generally feel negative emotions 3 times stronger.
Yeah.
So that's kind of something to bear in mind when we're talking to advertisers. Most advertisers that we work with in B2C are quite sort of saccharine sweet, and they're never going to want to elicit any negative emotions. So when they do get it wrong and there are any negative emotions, it really howls. It's quite interesting to see.
Nice. I think that sets us up brilliantly. It's almost like we met before and talked about what we were going to say a little bit. But it's always good to get the better detail out. Long form clearly is a storytelling opportunity, and clearly is an opportunity to build emotional resonance, right? And we know loads of business benefits come off the back of that. So it feels like the length of your content, it's particularly hero content, as it gets called a lot, should be a very deliberate strategic choice for those reasons. And I do think also for the practical reason of you might have a lot to explain, you might have a lot of points to land. But even if it's purely on because you need to make an emotional connection in order to write memory structures, there's a very strong argument for making content longer. I guess I'll open it to the floor. I think I know what you all think, but like, should long form content be a bigger part of the marketing mix in general for brands?
I can chip in on this because essentially, that I think I mentioned that to you before. I think the audience is aware of this new campaign with Chanel, Métier d'Art. It basically, so I have a friend, Elena Street, very talented director who also worked on it in New York in real time. And what we're seeing within the industry at the moment is making sure that we create content that immerses audiences. So the brands that are doing that at the moment, like Chanel did, look at the traction that it built within the industry, look at the level of like storytelling and input that it created as well. And that goes back to this kind of behavioral aspect of what's very important within this kind of attention economy that we live in is the fact that if you're able to get people to pause, then that's actually a small win because what people pause on is much more important than what they click on right now. So I definitely take that kind of new Chanel campaign, look at the execution that was done, look at the level of immersion of storytelling, getting those kind of models and that new like fashion catwalk in the middle of the subway, all that experience. And it kind of tapped into human emotions as well. There was a whole arc with ASAP Rocky and Margaret Qualley. So it's really interesting. So it does feel like at the moment, not only from a behavioral perspective, but from a creative perspective, there are brands that are doing this right. There are brands that are creating traction from different communities, and the ones that are able to do that are the ones that get people to pause, to be a bit surprised, to create that kind of emotion, and then lean in and dive in. But the final point I'll say is it doesn't mean that we can't listen into the audience, as Matt said as well, and dive into those kind of signals that we can find on short form. Listen into the audience. We have more signals than ever at the moment to leverage those signals and create stories that resonate and that are culturally relevant.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
think it's interesting you mentioned Chanel. Fashion and lifestyle brands are another place, and
exactly.
B2C that have been doing this quite well for a long time. The other one being entertainment as well. Did
Yeah,
anyone see the Timothy Chalamet Zoom call with his
yeah,
colleague to launch Marty Supreme? I think that's 45
yeah,
minutes long,
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that piece of content. And it's only a couple of weeks old. But it grabs your attention straight away. Oh, they've leaked a Zoom call, and
Yeah.
even you've realised they're acting it after about 30 seconds. But because Chalamet's doing a really good job of being an arrogant, hyper dickhead version of himself, it's just incredibly watchable all the way through and makes you understand what the film is about and hooks you in emotionally right the way through. And they're not selling a massively complicated thing. Fun film is what they're selling.
Yeah, but to be fair, that goes back to a talk that we've done like 2 months ago as well about like what are the elements that B2B can steal from B2C and why kind of the silos within B2B as well have completely been destroyed because you're talking to a decision fatigued kind of decision maker. You're speaking to someone that's also a human at the end of the day, and that has a lot going on. So the more you can tap into those human emotions within B2B, the more at the moment, from a neuroscience and behavioral perspective, we could see real outcomes, because shorter just weakens that connection. Leverage those signals, but ensure that you kind of develop longer stories. You can embed behavioral interventions within those long stories. We wrote a white paper with a learning production companies where we added behavioral factors like the Pygmalion effect, for example, where if you relate to someone that wants you to achieve something well, we call this woman Rose throughout the film, then you're more involved and more engaged. So you can also tap into those behavioral biases. And as Barney said, you can't do that within short. You can't use those behavioral biases to create things that are interesting. So there are so many opportunities at the moment within the B2B sector with long
That's
form
interesting. Well, yeah, and B2C as well. And I think
B2C, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great segue into my final question. And we'll start with Matt because he hasn't spoken for a bit, but I think all of you will have an opinion on this. How do we do it well? How do we do, if you had to say a couple of things, how do you do long form well? Matt.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier about long form being a bigger investment because I believe that there's more time, there's more money invested in producing the right piece of long form, but long form needs to have a lot more research done into what would actually resonate and be powerful enough. Barney said something about not speaking at a party, and it makes me think like short form is your invite to the party, but the long form is you having a conversation all night. And I do feel like there's lots of short form party invites. And just because somebody initially captures the attention with the short form, if you don't have the long form to back it up, to get that deeper engagement that they're looking from what originally triggered the activity, then you will lose in that conversation. And the company or the party that's putting out the long form that has the value, that's what someone will search for. So long form, as a side note, also creates a huge bank of searchability as well that lasts for years that short form doesn't.
Yeah,
that's an important piece on ROI. But creating it, you need to understand your audience. You need to understand what motivates them at that time. And this is all about understanding the pains that they're going through or the things that they aspire to be or want to be, or the real questions that would allow them to either advance in their career or in their personal life. Those sort of emotional connections drive engagement, whether it's B2B or B2C. Because I always hear this distinction, but I always worked on the model that every B2B conversation is a B2C one, because every B2B conversation is based on you speaking directly to an individual. So do you understand that individual? Can you create content that is strong enough that you are seen as the kind of expert guide for that human, and will they come back for more of that? I think that building up that bond creates the most or the highest likelihood of conversion that would benefit your business.
Nice one, Matt. And I know we're short on time, Rob, but I would be doing the industry a disservice were I not to point to the long and the short of it research from Binet and Field to do with that's talking about performance and brand, not necessarily the length of the content. But we do live in a world where we've been pushed predominantly by the platforms towards more and more of the sugary sweet little hits. And it's harder for CMOs to push for the budget, which is, as Matt was saying, difficult to sometimes get to build this brand. But all the research there shows that investment in brand drives long-term growth of the business. And generally speaking, you can build brand, I believe, better through longer form content.
I would agree massively.
Yeah.
And as the owner of an agency that makes loads of content, not ads, my agency is often on the same roster as agencies that make tele ads. And very often the brand will have done an amazing bit of brand work to get to a really powerful brand positioning, a big brand idea. But the default method that will get distilled into at the cost of millions, not just on media spend, but on the production of that 30-second spot and out of home, 3 out of home ads, right? That all of that work gets distilled down to that real short form stuff. And I just wonder what would happen if a brand went, do you know what? What's the 45-minute thing? Like Timothy Chalamet's thing. What's the 45-minute thing that we're going to make that's going to be an expression of this brand? And I'm not sure you'd have to spend as much money as you spend on your average 30-second tele ad. And B, if you couldn't cut a 30-second telly ad out of the 45-minute thing that you'd made by the end of it, I'd also be incredibly surprised. So that's my final little thought on it. And you know, you can come to our website and have a look. But I'm going to open the floor to the audience for some questions, which would be really fun to do. I don't know if there's been any going on in the chat. I'm on one screen. I can't see any questions happening. Is there any to bring to my attention?
No, there's nothing in the chat, but I'm more than happy to get the ball rolling on the question front because there is something that I'd like to ask you guys and get your opinions on it. Obviously, I think Matt, you were kind of saying towards the end there that obviously there's more time, research, and ultimately investment required to create, really effective long form. How would or how should rather agencies convince their clients to invest in that? And I suppose the next question from that is how can then CMOs convince their CFOs that the investment in long form is worthwhile? I don't know if you guys have got any thoughts on
Yeah,
that to offer.
yeah, completely. Number one, look at the research, of which there's a ton coming out of the IPA. It's stated over and over and over again to do with investment into brand and by proxy longer form. Number two, the wonderful Dr. Grace Kite of Magic Numbers did a calculator a while ago to enable CMOs to stick in a budget and try and put a number on what that will translate into kind of sugary sweet sales so that the CFO, who's normally quite dismissive and listening to the CEO and thinking in quarters, might actually be inclined to invest in stuff which will land in 3 years' time.
Yeah, to be honest, it relates to that point as well. So we work with so many like senior executives as well, like directly to convince them about it. So a lot of the keynotes that I do, actually, the end outcome is to show like the benefit and the research and the strategies that work well compared to things that don't. So I think it's a mission of ours from a scientific lens to come in and bridge like science and creativity and say, hey, like this is an approach that works and we're seeing it work and it's effective and you trust us within that journey versus this is an approach that doesn't work. So from our perspective, we're trying to remain the voice, the human compass, we say, or some people call us like noise canceling headphones, to say, hey, you know what, this is in all that noise, that's the precise approach you should follow. So I'm banging on the drums for like long form at the moment more than ever. Even with tech companies and my tech clients, they're building more long form content, and it says a lot if they are doing it. We're moving towards the experience economy. So everything is pointing towards that. So from our perspective, we kind of sit in the market to be those kind of people that keep sharing that research, and hopefully that can make a change.
I always forever convincing people to invest or bring money to a project, things like that. And statistics are crucial. The right business case based on those statistics are crucial. That applies for marketing, understanding your entire funnel from top to bottom and how people work their way through that. Short form captures attention, long form holds intention. What are it, and also using examples of businesses that because inspiring any sort of competition in this sort of environment is always positive, where businesses that you either want to emulate or compete against, what have they done? Where have they made missteps? Where have they seen like great success? Maybe they have big communities and things like that. It's using real examples of success rather than hunches, guesses, making sure that your metrics drive all the way to dollars, especially if you're trying to, or pounds. Sorry, I lived in America for 10 years now, but
One thing to that as well, which is because super long form, over like 5 minutes, let's say, or 10 minutes, is so rare that everyone's talking about the Timothy Chalamet thing.
Yeah.
Everyone talked in B2B, everyone talked about that Maersk long story about logistics in 2023, I think it was. And there's Paris Hilton doing the 10-minute
Yeah.
TikTok. There is a degree of notoriety and fame to be exploded just through doing something different in the short term, being, the first mover advantage.
Yeah, just the last thing on this is the industry is sitting on such a big pot of like creative directors, art directors, storytellers, producers that have so much to say, videographers, photographers. And the audience is craving that human experience back. It's very counterintuitive, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they want to go back out there. They need it. They're putting their phones on Do Not Disturb. They want to be involved. They want to be within that new ecosystem. And we're sitting on a pool of talent that we can engage. So as Barney said, there's a massive opportunity to be a bit more counterintuitive at the moment, because that's what's going to get you to stand out and get people to pause.
Yeah, and for me, the other thing that is slightly counterintuitive about it is what it's going to cost to invest in longer form. I think, committing to in the long term and building a community around it, obviously it comes with the price tag, but actually I would say don't be afraid to make the comparison to other types of content. It's a really famous quote, which I used to always think was a Churchill quote, but I recently learned maybe from Blaise Pascal, but it's the quote is that if I had time, I'd have written you a shorter letter. Will, my business partner at Nonsense, who is our creative partner, he does not find it easier to produce a shorter form thing. Like the edit time goes through the roof, and it is arguably more expensive some of the time to make things shorter. And you're doing that at the expense of the emotional engagement we've all talked about. So yeah, I don't know. That's my final thought from me. That was an awesome session. Thank you, panelists in particular, for taking part, but also audience for tuning in. It's been great to have so many of you here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you, Rob, for hosting such an interesting and lively conversation. Excellent hosting skills. Thank you, Leah, Barney, and Matt for taking part. Fantastic.
Yeah. And I just need to remember to plug Nonsense's recent brand credibility report. You can download it here. You can get a copy of this deck as well. And we're giving away some credibility workshops if anybody wants it. Click the link. Don't forget to like and subscribe. All the things that people say at the end of long form content. But yeah, that's my email address. If anybody wants to ask any further questions about this, it's a subject I'm super passionate about, and we've helped a lot of brands get into longer form world. So we'd love to do it for your brand too. Thanks for sticking with us to the end, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Ciao, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.